So, why are we here? So, today we're going to be talking about building momentum, igniting motivation and success, and really digging into what is it that you want and why do you want that? This is obviously such a simple question, but also one of the most difficult questions that most people have to ask themselves because most of us haven't really thought about it. Or maybe we haven't had to think about it because so many things have kind of fallen into place in our lives, or we've just sort of followed a path up until this point. We'll dig into that just a little bit more of how things change as our life progresses and what sometimes catalyzes these questions that you might be asking yourself. So that's what we're going to get into today. So a quick overview of why are we here? What are we really doing? First of all, give yourself a big pat on the back for taking this time to spend on yourself. As we progress, and especially our leadership journey, the number one question that we hear is, how do I spend more time on myself? How can I prioritize more time on myself? Leaders start to get split into taking care of so many other folks in the organization, in addition to trying to make sure that everything's getting done, that often we end up putting ourselves last. If any of this is resonating with you, I wonder if you're kind of going, yeah, that sounds familiar. One of the coaches that worked with us was the CEO of his own 80, $90 million P&L companies. And he said, being a CEO was the loneliest position I was ever in because I didn't really have a chance to talk with anyone. So hopefully you've had an opportunity to maybe even try coaching, or you have a mentor or a network of people that you can reach out to so that you can use this time to kind of pull apart things that you're working on and think through what really, really matters. So this is the first step, is just making the time to do it. So give yourself a big pat on the back for that. So what we're going to talk about today is defining what you really, really want. Again, some of you probably know that really well. For some of you, maybe it's shifted a little bit and you're in that gray zone, that kind of like, I don't know, there's so many different directions zone, or maybe something happened to you and you're trying to figure out how to react to something that's come up in your lives. It doesn't really matter what's gotten us to this question of what is it that I really, really want? What is my life really about? What's my passion? What's my purpose? That's what we're going to talk about today. So, and then the last thing that we'll go into is considering some next steps. I'll give you some exercises that I think are just fun to do to help try to scratch this itch and get a little bit more clarity around what you really want. Notice what your emotional state is as you're asking yourself some of these questions, because a lot of times, depending on what's happened that's gotten us to this point of asking where we are, what we want, what's my life supposed to be about, what's the next step, sometimes that can make us feel sad depending on what's happened. And so if we approach this question of what I really want in sort of that kind of sad mindset, then we'll often find what comes out is maybe a sad outcome. Like, well, maybe I should just do this, even though that's not the thing. Anytime I hear a client use the word should, supposed to, ought to, that tells me that they're in an old paradigm. Maybe they're living someone else's rules for what's supposed to happen now, as opposed to getting really clear on what it is that you want. So watch your shoulds. Don't should all over yourself. All right, so that's a little bit of an intro as to what we're going to be getting into. So the big question here is, what do we stand for? Why do we do what we do? And what we've done in the past lends some light into what we might want to do in the future. But this is a pretty big question. So why we do what we do? A lot of people have been scratching the itch on this. Simon Sinek is probably one of the biggest authors that comes to mind. In 2009, he recorded a TED Talk that I think is still on the top 5 most watched TED Talks of all time, on how great leaders inspire action. And in that TED Talk, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend going and watching it, because it is very motivating and it crystallizes some things that help us understand what this why thing really represents. He says, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So when I can get clear about why I'm doing the things that I'm doing, whether they have positive effects or negative effects, my why is still kind of rooted behind all of it. Then a lot of times, especially as a leader, I can motivate people with that because my why of what I'm trying to accomplish might resonate with their why too. And what's really cool is when we get clear about what our whys are, as Simon Sinek likes to put it, we often can create momentum around what's our why going forward. We did some work with one of the largest chemical companies in the world, and at one point there was an agricultural research organization that we were working with within this company, and they were the ones that would actually grow plants and see, does this fertilizer make it better, does this weed killer specifically make it better. And so they're testing out all these different things to see the impacts that it has on the environment and on crop yield. And we asked this question, so why does your team do what your team does? And one of the guys that led the team that was actually out in the field had one of the best whys I've ever heard. He said, our why is to feed the world. And the way that we accomplish that, and then that's kind of the how and the what, is that we do these different things to test our pesticides and test our fertilizers and see what the impact is going to be so that we can ultimately produce more food for the world, to feed the world. So that's what we're talking about when we say, what's your why? It's that thing that's motivating to you and maybe to other people too. So Simon Sinek is one of the people that's really resonated on this concept of a why. Another big author that you may have heard of before, Peter Drucker, he wrote a bunch of different books, but one of them that I'm going to reference is this concept of managing oneself. Managing in the 21st century is kind of where this comes from. And in that small snippet of what he has researched, he helped to kind of lay out like what happens in our lives along the way, what might drive us to some of these questions. And I thought it was pretty fascinating. So bear with me for a second. Let's take a walk through the typical phases of life. So let's say between the ages of about 0 to 20. Of course, this is going to completely vary depending on everyone's unique lives, but in general, let's just say between the ages of 0 and 20, for the most part, we're defining who we are. Who am I? And how do I fit into this big thing called the rest of the world with all of these people? Between the ages of 20 to 30, maybe we've gotten some education, some training, we've gotten out there, we've gotten into the world. Maybe we've already started a little bit, when we were in high school, but now we're in kind of our professional careers. And between the ages of 20 to 30, we're sort of going, this is who I am. This is how I contribute. And we get better at it and better at it and better at it. Or for some of us, maybe we learn more and more and more about ourselves and what we really want and didn't necessarily want as we have some of those external experiences. But between 20 and 30, we're essentially beginning to get very good at that thing that we do. And then rough order of magnitude, somewhere between 30 and 40, 30 to 45, even maybe even 30 to 50, somewhere along the way, we realize we've gotten pretty good at what we really wanted to do. We've done it. And so then we kind of wonder like, well, what else is there? And that's sort of when sometimes people plateau. This is often referred to, you may have guessed it already, the midlife crisis. It's not necessarily a midlife crisis in the same sense that I wish people wouldn't have called it the Great Resignation after COVID. I honestly think it was more of the Great Resonation because we all had a chance to resonate on the things that mattered the most to us in our lives. If the whole world is different than we thought, if I might die, if someone breathes on me the wrong way, wow, what is this thing called life really about? So a lot of us has probably had a little bit more motivation than normal to think through some of these questions. So back to Peter Drucker's concepts, in the midlife crisis time frame, it's not that we're really in a crisis, it's just that we've plateaued and we're starting to figure out like what else is there. For a lot of you, you may reflect on this and think, this is where I've followed the path, try to get good grades, try to go to the good school, try to get the good degree, try to get the good job, maybe try to find the good spouse, maybe try to start a family or buy a home or whatever those rules are. And then eventually you get all that. And it's like, well, where's the rest of the map? What's the rest of the map have on it? So the midlife crisis is really this opportunity for us to resonate deeply with the things that matter the most to us. And for some people, this is a journey that continues to unfold for years, maybe even decades. Sometimes this looks like I decide to do something that requires a little bit more mastery in my free time. Like maybe I'm going to take up guitar lessons or singing. My mom actually started playing the drums at one point, which was awesome. I never would have thought of my mom as a drummer, but it was just something fun that she wanted to do. And for some of us, this means a complete life shift too, as we have awareness around those things that matter the most to us. So sometimes that means that we have, sometimes I'll call alternative peer groups too. So sometimes that'll change who we want to hang around with the most. So don't beat yourself up too much if you find that, maybe the people that were always your friends before, you're looking for something a little bit different. That's just a normal phase of transition that we're in. So Simon Sinek and Peter Drucker are two really good people that have kind of talked about this. And then the third reference that I'll bring up in this concept of what do we stand for, why do we do what we do, is a woman named Dr. Brene Brown. Many of you probably know Dr. Brene Brown. I've had the opportunity to work with her since, oh gosh, about 2012, long before Daring Greatly and Rising Strong and Braving the Wilderness and Atlas of the Heart and Dare to Lead ultimately have all come out when she was kind of first starting her journey, when I was also first starting kind of my own journey into coaching. I'll tell you more about that in just a second. Brene has, I think, really coined the market on creating a new language around something that we all experience, but just maybe didn't know how to talk about before. And what I believe she's really done a great job of is talking about the concept that courage and vulnerability are two sides of the same coin. You can't think of a time when you or someone that you've seen being courageous has not also at the exact moment been vulnerable. But when we're little kids, we learn that vulnerability, unfortunately, we pop out of the womb like vulnerability is not a problem at all. I'll try all these different things. But as we grow and mature, I think we get laughed at just enough times on the playground. We get made fun of just enough times that we realize like, ugh, maybe I need to shield myself a little bit. Brene gave a presentation to an audience of a lot of deaf folks. Hearing disabled folks. So she had the sign interpreter ask her, what are some of the words that you're going to be using a lot? Because I want to make sure that we have the right signs. And she said, well, I'm going to say vulnerability like 1,000 times. And so what's the sign for that? And so the sign for vulnerability is, I don't know if you can see it, but sort of on her hand there, like kind of like this weak knees. Well, for any of you that know Brene's research, she said that's not going to work. The number one myth of vulnerability is that it's weakness. Vulnerability isn't weakness. It's actually our greatest source of strength and courage. But it feels like risk, emotional uncertainty, and emotional exposure and uncertainty, and it can be excruciating. So she said, what's another sign that might work for this concept of vulnerability? Because it's our birthplace of courage. And the sign interpreter said, well, here's another one. Just like what's on the screen with what this little boy is doing, kind of showing his star, showing his heart. And this is vulnerability because we're opening ourselves up and we're showing maybe our hearts, the things that matter the most to us, the things that feel the most important to us. So that might have been visceral for you, Amy Cuddy. How do we get into these visceral physical poses that actually change the way we emotionally show up? One of the other things that, of course, Brene talked about too is that the power of story resonates with us so deeply. So wherever we can, we want to really talk through what's my story, what's your story, and we share our stories with people that have earned the right to hear it. We don't necessarily have to overshare with everyone, but what's your story is really important. So let me tell you a little bit about my own story and some of the ways that I've gotten into where I am now. So for me, I am from Kansas originally. I went to Kansas State University, and I thought engineering sounded great. And so I was going into a bioprocess engineering field, kind of half chemical engineering, half kind of ag, almost like biological type engineering. And it just seemed cool, but I didn't know what I wanted to do, but that's what everybody asks, right? What do you want to do for the rest of your life? Because then you get that degree and then you go do that for the rest of your life, which is a big misnomer. That's why I'm using my air quotes. So as I'm in college, I started thinking, well, I want to work somewhere where I don't wake up and go, ugh, I have to go to work today. Because life seems too short to do that, to wake up and go, ugh, I have to go to work today. I already knew that. So when I was in school at one point, I thought, I bet, I bet NASA would be a really cool place to work. And I remember when I first started talking to people about that, they were like, "Oh, that's sweet. You're gonna be so disappointed when you don't get that job." But because I was a straight A student, I had a lot of fun in college. I still learned everything I needed to learn. I got a decent GPA, but I enjoyed the social side of it in addition to the educational side of it. Maybe they're both educational. So I started writing research papers. I started doing some extracurricular things to try to learn more about, well, what would that look like? What could I possibly do at NASA? And I started realizing that there were these different opportunities to work with astronauts in their food and how bioregenerative processes work. So, how could we maybe put the Earth in a little box to take it somewhere else? And so I'm starting to write research papers on this. And my last semester of college, I was writing a research paper and I reached out to the curator of the Johnson Space Center Contracting Company's website and thought, who would ever respond to some, crazy Kansas kid asking about some more information for a research paper? And of course, do you have anything that's open and coming up? It's my 10-year goal to somehow be affiliated with NASA. Well, it turns out that woman did get back to me, and she actually took me in under her wing. She called me her Kansas kid. I called her my Texas mom. And she was a huge mentor in my life. And she said, NASA's looking for somebody with your degree qualifications right now. So I ended up getting the job before I even graduated. It felt like such an organically graceful moment, just sort of a blessing. Like, oh my God, I guess I worked for it. I knocked on the doors, I scratched the itches, but the opportunity was there too. That's the magic of figuring out what we really want, is sometimes when we figure that out and we put the work in behind it, the universe sometimes rewards us with that too. So getting clear on what we really, really want is very important. Fast forward, I worked at NASA for a long time. When I first met Barbara, she said, my Texas mom, she said, Laurie, you're gonna love it here, but the NASA red tape and politics will drive you crazy. And it did. It started to. It was the coolest place in the world. About 10 years in, I was like, some of these things just feel inefficient. And so I tried to implement the Lean Six Sigma program at the Johnson Space Center when we still had about 15,000 employees there. And couldn't understand why, after 2 years of trying to do process improvement events, we would get about 30% of our implementation plan done, and then it would be overcome by events, or we'd be off and run and try to solve the next thing. And 30% is big, but why isn't it 100%? I didn't understand. And it's because if we tackle only the process side of things, if we tackle only the what, if we tackle only like the next step, what's the plan? How do I accomplish this thing? I'm not actually incorporating this much larger part of myself, which is the people side of things. Values, communication, reward systems. Do I even like my job anymore? What do I really, really want? And why? What am I motivated by? What are my needs? What are my wants? So there is the catalyst for why I started New Horizon Strategies back in 2011 to help bring the professional world alive, to help leaders get bigger breakthroughs faster by incorporating both the process side and the people side into it. In my own why, Simon Sinek, Brene Brown, Peter Drucker, Daniel Pink, so many of these wonderful resources along the way, my own big transition between being a NASA recovering engineer to a CEO and founder of New Horizon Strategies, coach and facilitator, was getting clear on why I felt like I was doing what I was doing. And I just knew I needed to see the difference I was making in people's lives more directly. That's a big ask, because I was making a difference. Everybody said that at NASA, but what I finally realized is what I was doing, well, it was making an external difference. I'll make a difference if I am the, cashier at the gas station on the corner. Uh, the most important thing is, does that make a difference to me? Does that make a difference to me as I open up and start to realize what are the things that really motivate me and why? Because that tends to be the place where we make the biggest difference in the world. That potentially resonates with you. That's my story. I hope you appreciate that. And hopefully it gives you a little bit more insight all along the way of what are the things that are resonating with you and why, and how can we just allow that. So some of these questions that come up as we start to think about what we really want, what my purpose is, are, of course, that it's a combination of intrinsic motivations, needs, and wants. I define that as values. Motivations, needs, and wants, those are values. So if you haven't taken a values assessment in a while, let me know. I'm happy to share one with you that I think is phenomenal. And then there's also sometimes this element of spiritual calling. That's often, it could be religion for you, or it could be, am I living my life in accordance with my values? Sometimes I feel like I'm just pulled to do certain things. Maybe that resonates with you. And then, of course, my purpose sometimes is, you might say, calibrated by experiences, circumstances, and opportunities. Now, the important thing there is to learn what we're meant to learn from those experiences, circumstances, and opportunities, because sometimes we are given some hard truths in our awareness journey of what's possible and what's not. But there's two really important words to add to the end of any question of what's possible or what's not, and that's right now. What's possible, what's not, right now. And depending on how motivated I am to do something, or what my needs or wants are, then I can make a decision on what feels like the right next step is right now. Because that could change. That will change. I guarantee that will change in 6 months, in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years. And then all of a sudden, you're in the place that you always wanted to be. And now you're asking this question again, maybe what's next? It often takes a significant emotional experience for us to really see. Now, this is an interesting question, because does it have to? I don't know. I have met some people that have written research papers on this, and sometimes when our heart really gets tickled, that's when we get motivated the most to change something. In Lean Six Sigma, we used to say people don't change until they're just uncomfortable enough to do something about it. Well, maybe, or they're just incentivized enough to do something about it, which maybe is the same thing as discomfort. So as you're thinking through this, you might be swimming through like, well, I think I really want to make the world a better place, or I know I want to learn this specific small detail, that's like a class or a training or a certification, maybe not so small, but that's pretty specific. So this is an analogy that I like to use as you're trying to just punch through what are the things that I really want, because it doesn't matter where you start. If you start at the details, you can extrapolate out to the vision. If you start at the vision, you can sort of interpolate back to like, what are the details that need to come out of that? So the analogy I like to use is a vine, a grapevine. I do like wine also, so that's a bit of a motivator. But so think of the vine, the grapevine, essentially as the vision that you're really shooting for. I want to find the next job that helps me see the difference I'm making directly in other people's lives. That's pretty big. It's a pretty big vision. On that vine, luckily, are a bunch of different bunches of grapes. So I have all these different bunches. I like to call those goals. So goal along the way, maybe for me, was figure out how much money do I have versus how much money do I need right now that I'm spending, so I know how much I can go and play with, to maybe do some more professional development on myself, to do some of those things that are making my heart stir a little bit and just learn more. Maybe I'll stop investing in some of my financial investments and start investing in myself and see what the return on investment might be in that. So that's an example of some of the goals that might come out. So as I start laying out my goals, then I start to get really clear on, well, what are those tasks? What are the things that I need to figure out? And those are the specific grapes that are on each bunch. So whether you're at the task level or you're at the vision level, you're at the grape level, or you're at the vine level, it doesn't really matter. Just know that you might have a little bit of work to do one way or the other to break it down or to pull it up. Hopefully that's helpful. So two different activities that I want to give you that I think will resonate with you, and I just think they're fun. This recovering engineer, I believe the world needs way more fun. So what are some things that might help me figure this out? When we change our modality for how we're processing information, we often change what comes out. There's also a theory that the body knows. So when we can drop into more of our awareness from our body, then we sometimes can see more clearly what we really, really want. So here are a couple ideas to do that don't take you too far off the edge, but maybe sound kind of fun. So one of them is this concept of drawing what you really want. So that would be the idea. So find a time where you can be by yourself, maybe play some great music, get the cool markers or pens or colored pencils out, and on a sheet of paper or even a big flip chart, whatever you decide to use, draw what you really want. And it's amazing how you may stare at that sheet of paper, but you will start drawing. It's amazing how quickly we do this. I give this to executive MBA students that I work with at different universities that are very well established, and people love this. I've never had anyone not figure out what to draw. So try that one. It's amazing what comes out. This was an example that a client of mine has said is okay to share. This was an example of a drawing that came out as a client's kind of working through, where am I right now and what do I really want? And of course, the spacesuit seems kind of interesting, but what we started to realize is what was going on for her at the time is she was feeling like she really had to protect herself. And what you notice when you draw things like this is, what's the emotion that you get from some of the colors? None of her body, if she's in the spacesuit, which she said she was, none of her body's touching anything. You actually can't even see her face. You don't even know if she's smiling or not. So there are a lot of aha moments that come to us when we draw out the things that are happening. This is just an example. Another thing that you might enjoy, and feel free to take a screenshot of this if you need to, but is brain writing. So some of you like journaling, some of you don't necessarily like journaling, but as you consider to write, brain writing is what authors do when they get writer's block. They'll just start writing, and they may literally be writing, I'm just going to start writing because I'm not sure what I need to say. And then all of a sudden, our body knows how to do this. We'll drop into ourselves and start writing the things that are naturally kind of coming out of us. So here are a few prompt questions for you to consider. What do I really want? Why do I really want this? What does success actually mean to me? Where do I already know I need to develop myself? What could happen if I develop myself in this way? What does my life look like when this happens? So I would recommend spending a couple minutes maybe on each question. You can even time yourself if you'd like to, and then just see where it goes. See what becomes more clear after you spend a little bit of time on this. Reflection not only allows us to answer, how am I doing more accurately, it helps us determine where we need to focus to continue to effectively navigate change. We're in a constant state of change because we're alive. That's the whole point. So celebrate it, and then figure out, like, how can I start to drive my car more purposefully? And for some of us, I know for me, I felt like I'd been white knuckling the steering wheel. And so some of it was starting to let my hands release the wheel a little bit more. Howard Thurman, one of my favorite quotes, said, don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, and then go do that, because that's what the world really needs. So some of the people that I've done this with before, especially the brain writing and the drawing, say that they've been able to take away awareness, possibilities, creativity, honesty, connectedness, awareness, insightfulness. It's been empowering and freeing. So hopefully you find that too. I really appreciate the time with you today. Thank you for making this time for yourself. And please reach out if you need anything along the way. This is my favorite thing to do, is to see the positive, sustainable impact that I'm having in other people's lives. So thank you for the opportunity if you ever need anything in the future. Have a great day.